Hey everyone, Shane here. I recently asked you on social media for you to give me questions to ask candidates for the City of Yarra elections around topics around disability, access and inclusion. Thank you all for your amazing questions, and today I'm about to ask them to a bunch of different candidates and find out what their plans are in making City of Yarra more inclusive for everyone. Join me as I interview Sharon Harrison from Boulevard Ward. Thank you so much for joining me and allowing me to interview you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really welcome the opportunity to speak to you today.
So, to start off with, tell me a little bit about yourself and why it is that you're running for council.
Okay, well, I've been in Richmond for 12 years with my family, so I consider myself a long-term Richmond resident, although many people tell me that they've been in Richmond for 40, 50 years, so I recognise that I'm, by many people's standards, I'm a newbie. Look, I love it as a place to live, but I think it could be so much better, and there's lots of things that I think council should be doing that are not happening, and that's really why I'm stepping up to run for council, because I think we need people who are committed to our local community, who will step up and make change and really positive change that it improves for the whole community. And so that's why I'm standing, essentially.
People with disabilities, we like to be able to use public spaces like our parks, our gardens, and also community centres. If elected, what will you be doing to be able to make those places more accessible, more inclusive to everybody?
Look, I think the key thing is with everything, whether it's the footpath, whether it's the access to the buildings, there needs to be clear ways to get in, there needs to be ramps, that everything really needs to be set up so that all members of the community can come and partake in those activities. So I think we really need to have a lens that looks at things in terms of disability, that we don't just look at it in terms of can an able-bodied person get here, but whether a person who's got a disability, whether it's accessible for them as well, because I think that's a big issue, and I think that we should really be moving heaven and earth to ensure that all members of the community can be participating in these activities, whether it's at the park or a council building, or also the pubs and clubs around Yarra. So whether there needs to be steps within the planning schemes and so forth that really encourage businesses and organisations to actually, make changes that will make the places accessible to all.
City of Yarra has a lot of businesses within it. I think it's about 16,000 businesses, and only recently it did a study to work out how many of them are accessible. And a lot of the businesses, especially on our high streets, are not accessible for people with disabilities. If elected, what will you be doing to be able to make our businesses more accessible and inclusive, and especially for wheelchair users when there's a step to get into a business?
So, look, I've sort of mentioned the planning scheme. I think we have to put in place things to actually encourage those businesses to do those things, and provide funding as well, because we have to understand that it does cost to do those things, and so I think the council should be looking at ways to provide grants for businesses to actually try and put in place those things that are needed to make their businesses more accessible. So I think that's what we should be looking at.
Well, I like the idea of grants for businesses to make their business more accessible. What a good idea.
I think that's the point. I think if you make it easier for people, then they will try and take steps to improve the situation. And I guess that's a key thing, is looking at the ways in which council can support that.
It's no surprise to the public that one issue that affects me and many people with disabilities is e-scooters, e-bikes, rental products blocking footpaths, being ridden on footpaths. It's been a nightmare for the last 2.5 years. Our current council has not really listened and acted on the needs of our community. If elected, what will you be doing in regards to e-products blocking footpaths all around the municipality?
Well, firstly, I applaud the work that you've done to actually hold council to account on this issue. You've done a really important thing in taking council to VCAT, and I hope that actually prompts them to do something more. In terms of me, I will be advocating for far greater controls over where they can be parked in Yarra, and to ensure that geofencing is put in place to ensure that they're not simply littering the pavements all over the place. So I think that has got to be a priority, to actually say enough is enough. We cannot have these things blocking the pavements so that it's less accessible for all sorts of members of the community. It's not just people with disabilities, it's people with prams, it's even myself. I have issues with them being parked all over the place. So I think I have a real sense as well that the community actually wants something done about this, and we have to do it. We cannot simply prioritise the needs of one group and mobility over the needs of another group. And so that really is, I think, the key thing here. It's actually a human right to be able to get around in our streets, and we should not be having a situation whereby e-scooters are making life really difficult for many members of the community.
People with disabilities have the right to catch a train, catch a tram, just like everybody else. A lot of City of Yarra, the public transport is not accessible. I live on Burnley Street, I can't even get on a tram, and the train station near me is almost too dangerous for me to use. If elected, what will you be doing in regards to helping to make the public transport within the council area more accessible and inclusive for everybody?
I think the key thing here is that obviously council doesn't have control over what Public Transport Victoria does, and so I think that there is a huge advocacy piece for the council to be taking up to ensure that the accessible tram stops are built in more locations, and also that something's done. Burnley Station is a problem for all sorts of reasons. Obviously it's very steep, but it floods this, so it's clearly an issue, and I think the council should be working with the state government to do something about Burnley Station. I think that's the key things, is to set up to have more accessible tram stops, and also ensure that there are things in place to make sure that all train stations are actually more accessible, because it's very, very difficult for somebody to sort of have to trek all the way to Richmond Station, I'm sure. So yes, I think we have to be working towards all of those train stations being accessible for people with disabilities, and work on having more and more of the more accessible tram stops in Yarra.
As a person with disability myself, I like to be heard, and I like to be able to give my input to matters that affect other people with disabilities. If elected, what will you be doing to ensure that people with disabilities have a voice in the community and have input on matters that affect community, and also matters affecting planning?
I think a key thing that is certainly why I'm standing for council is that the consultation that's occurred with council is not the best. And I think we should be doing a lot more in terms of consultation, and also making sure that all the groups that have a skin in the game, as it were, are actually consulted when council is making decisions about planning and all sorts of things. So I think that's the key thing, is that council actually needs to be prioritising consultation with the community, including the disability community, to say we've got to hear those voices, that we don't simply go making decisions without actually stopping and listening and getting feedback from those people.
If elected, how would you manage maintenance and upgrades to public infrastructure, especially of footpaths? Because a lot of the footpaths within City of Yarra are not up to standard. And it affects people with wheelchairs, also people with visual impairments as well.
It's funny you should mention that, because I've spoken to people who have tripped on the pavements in Yarra, and so it's and lots of them have got issues with the in terms of how level they are, which is a problem for all members of the community. I think the key thing is that we actually probably need to have a bit of a review of all our pavements. We've heard at VCAT recently that they actually don't know the width of all the pavements, whether e-scooters can be parked on them or not, and equally we've got issues around the standard of the pavements in terms of whether they're level and tree roots rising up and so forth. So I actually think there probably needs to be a good review of the situation with pavements. If they're looking at e-scooters and whether they can be parked and whether there needs to be geofencing in certain areas, then perhaps they should be having a good whole look at the state of pavements, not just in terms of whether they're suitable for e-scooters to be parked there, but also whether they're up to standard and whether they're a risk in terms of people tripping and or even wheelchairs being able to manoeuvre around. So I think that's the first step, is to get information and start prioritising the areas that are probably the biggest problem.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to interview.
Thank
and
you.
Good luck with your campaign.
Thanks, Shane.
And if you've got any questions for Sharon, just pop them in the comments. Good luck.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks for joining me on the interview. And don't forget to leave your comments below. And if you're a candidate and you want to be interviewed, hit me up. Let's together make City of Yarra more accessible and inclusive for everyone.